Jack and his family, very poor family, lived in the old cabin right along the road. You remember seeing the old cabin? You've been to camp here before? You remember they called it the Willie Jack cabin? Well, his family lived there. His mom, his dad, and his two brothers, Will and Tom, and Jack. Better known as Willie Jack. He was the youngest. And he was always wanting to help out, but his older brothers would always seem to get the task of going away and getting a job, earning some kind of income to make it through the cold winters. Now, Rosemary and I have lived here 10 years, and we've seen some of those cold winters. You run out of firewood, and you can't get to the store. The roads are covered up. Well, back then they didn't have cars. They walked wherever they went. And so this story, and I haven't told it before. So it's called Something New and Something Old. And it starts out talking about Willie Jack and his family, his mama. His dad was already away from the house. It was getting to be winter, and things are getting kind of sparse around the house. Not much food. And there's an old cabin. There was cracks in the walls, and the cold wind was coming through, and they needed to get firewood and other supplies for the winter, but they really couldn't afford it. And so his two brothers, they went off and to look for some job and left Willie Jack at home with his mom. And about this time he was probably 11 years old. And the first story I told earlier was about Willie Jack trying to do what his big brothers did, and they went out to look for their fortunes. You know, they didn't know what they were looking for, but they went out to look for them. And Willie Jack never found it, but he traveled the world as a result, and he learned a lot. So this is a story in which he's going to learn a little bit more about life. And it's set up in the hills here. Willie Jack's cabin, his family, up on the top of the mountain. I think they call it Christmas Tree Mountain, because it's the shape of a Christmas tree. And lived in this case, an old lady. Take that in a good sense. Okay, old lady. And she had magic powers. And so she had was able to survive the cold winters, and they wanted to meet one of her challenges. Like other mountain rich farmers, and so forth, kings, they would always want to capture the prettiest girl in the valley and bring her up and marry her. Well, this rich farmer didn't like that. They took his daughter. And so Willie Jack's brothers tried to rescue her. They were not successful. They came down and told Willie Jack and his mom, there's no way. And these brothers were much older and stronger than he was. And so they went off in another direction to find work and get income. So, Willie Jack had gone to town to maybe find a job. And he saw a poster on one of the store walls, announcing that one of the farmer's daughters had been kidnapped and taken to the top of the mountain. And that was a reward for that. And so Willie Jack says, if I can get that daughter back to her father, maybe I'll get that reward and we'd have enough to make it through the winter. So he convinced his mom that he was old enough to go out on his own for a while. And so he began to head up the mountain. And as he went up there, he met an old gentleman that came out of the forest. He was kind of walking with his cane, kind of elderly. And Willie Jack was sitting on a log there, eating a sandwich that his mom had made. And the old man said, I'm sure hungry. I'd sure like to have a little bit of that sandwich. Well, it happened to be that Willie Jack's brother, Will and Tom, had run into the same situation. And the old man asked the same question, but they turned him down. And they did not meet that challenge when they went up to the mountaintop. Well, Willie Jack said, you sit down and share this meal with me. And so, sure enough, afterwards, he shared a magic marble with Willie Jack. So I'd heard about you're going up the top of the mountain to try to get that farmer's daughter back. And that mountain man up there is very smart. But if you take this marble, you can look at it through it, and you can kind of see what's going on and not be trapped. And so Willie Jack put it in his pocket, headed up the mountain. And sure enough, he came up with the top of the mountain where the mountain man lived. And he said, I want to put the farmer's daughter back. And the mountain man said, well, you can try to get her back, but there's some requirements on that. And so Willie Jack said, what are they? He said, well, you're going to have to learn to chop wood. Whole bunch of wood for the winter. Willie Jack says, that should not be any problem. So he got the marble out of his pocket. And what was told to him by the man in the forest was if you use this marble and you say something to it, that will be done. So Willie Jack says, okay. Firewood split. And all of a sudden, trees started falling in front of them. And they fell in sections. And something began to split it up. Stack it up off to the side. And Willie Jack couldn't believe it. So the mountain man couldn't either. He said, well, all right, but you're going to have to pass some other tests to get that farmer's daughter back. And one of the things was that he had told his mom before he left, and that he would get enough food for their winter. Well, the old man in the forest says, now look at this marble, and if you say to it, tablecloth, food, tablecloth, all of a sudden there'd be a tablecloth full of food on that tablecloth, more than you can eat. And so Willie Jack and this forest man, they had a good lunch. But then it went away. So he took the marble, as I mentioned earlier, put it in his pocket, and he had found out how he could get the wood. But he said, okay, I'm not worried about food, and he pulled the marble out of his pocket, which he shouldn't have done, in front of that mountain man. And the mountain man says, all tablecloth, food, tablecloth. And all of a sudden in his cabin, the tablecloth spread out. Now banquet was right there on the table. And the mountain man couldn't believe it. So he said, okay, that's pretty good. But, you're going to have to do some other things about getting the daughter. And she is in the back of the cabin there, and she is ill. And so he opened the door, and sure enough, the young girl was in bed, didn't look very well. And Willie Jack took the marble out of his pocket and looked at her. And sure enough, the old devil was standing right next to her bed. And Willie Jack said, no problem. So he took the marble and said, firewood, firewood, chase the devil. And all of a sudden through the cabin windows came a number of pieces of firewood, whopping that devil on the head, raining right out of the cabin. And as soon as he did, the young daughter woke up and she looked like she was well again. But the old man said, nope, that's not the end of it. If you're going to marry her, you need to clean out my barn. So he went out to the barn with Willie Jack, and it was a mess. And he said, you're going to have to clean up all that hay on the barn floor and the manure and everything. Well, he said, no problem, no problem. He took the marble out of his pocket, and he says, clean, marble, clean. And all of a sudden, coming through the barn window was a wind that blew the hay off to one end into a big stack. And a shovel came through the window and magically started scooping up all that manure and got it out of the barn and put it outside. And pretty soon that barn was clean. Well, the mountain man just couldn't believe it. Said, okay, let's see what else you can do. He says, I want you to go out by the road. And there along the road was tall grass. I need for you to clean up that tall grass on both sides of the road all the way to town. And Willie Jack said, no problem. Took the marble out of his pocket, looked through it, and all of a sudden he said, sickle, mow, sickle, mow. And sickle is like a cutting blade. And so it came out and started working on its own. Cleaned one side of the road, came back up the other. And there the road and the grass was cleaned on both sides. And so Willie Jack, having cleaned up the barn, having cleaned up the road, the mountain man said, okay, there's some gold at the end of the barn there in that big chest. You can take it and take the girl too. And he returned the girl back to her home, and he was able to keep the gold to take it home. And he met friends along the way and shared it with them because they were having a hard time as well. And so Willie Jack learned that if you work hard enough and that you share with others, that many blessings will come back to you. Unlike his brothers Will and Tom, who said, no, I'm keeping what I got and doesn't share. But Willie Jack was able to do that through his lifetime. He made many friends. And Willie Jack is well known here at the camp of sharing and helping. Did you go to camp here?
4 years. 4 years.
And did you hear any Willie Jack stories?
I played.
Yeah. Did you?
Yeah.
And you heard the saying? Willie Jack story? Wow. That's amazing. I haven't been here for 10 years. Good to hear. Now, so, take on the tradition of Willie Jack. We learned that in our scriptures, reading the Bible, we learned it in our churches, but Willie Jack took it to heart, and it became a real thing for him. I see an old friend that just walked in. I'm going to tell you a story. This is one of the hardest working volunteers for this camp, and he lives right down the road. You still live down the road?
Yes, sir.
I haven't seen you for 10 years.
Been a while.
And I'm going to tell you his name. He's a famous man. His name was so famous that they sent him to New York to be on a nighttime program. Was it Johnny Carson or
David Letterman.
David Letterman? With some other folks. I want to introduce to you Donald Trump. This is I won't get into that. This is a Donald Trump that will do anything for anybody. Now, you want an example of Willie Jack. There's a grown-up Willie Jack right there.
Did you tell him all the stories about Willie Jack?
A couple of them, yeah. So,
I spent one night in the staff house right there. After y'all were gone on Thanksgiving, wanted to stay up here and watch over the camp for Thanksgiving weekend. And I went down 11 o'clock, closed the gates, and came back up, and sleeping in the front bunk bed, whatever, and went to bed about 12 o'clock. And along about 15 minutes later, sounded like that across the front room. I was the only person here. And I got up, and no wind blowing, no one else around. I thought, somebody's playing a prank on me. Walked in there, there was no one at all. I looked outside, and it just sounded a metal chair like we had over in the front room, slide about 20 feet across the concrete.
Willie came to visit.
Kind of gives you a chill bump, you know?